Economic Development Innovation Committee meeting. We have two items on our agenda today. We're going to start with the first.
Mr. Melton, this is Jim Green. You went out a little bit. Were you turning it over to me? Are you ready for staff to move forward?
Jim, Jim, go ahead.
Okay, thank you. City Council, welcome to today's Economic Development Committee meeting. Mr. Melton broke up a little bit there. I hope everyone can hear me okay, and I apologize for any technical difficulties we're having. But there are two items for today's agenda. The first item is a new item and was requested by Mayor Baldwin. And the item is the city notification or alert system. And this goes back to some of the protests that we've had over the past many months. And Mayor Baldwin heard that some of the businesses were asking if there was a better way for the city to communicate and notify them about the protest. We put a city team together and evaluated new technology and existing technology. Damian Graham, our communications director, is going to present today and talk about expanding one of our existing systems. We felt that was the most economical way and quickest way to get some improvements on the ground. The whole idea is to offer an expanded system to our Gov delivery system now that will include text messages for potential protests and some unique events. And those texts could go to really anyone in the city that requests it, be a business or a resident, no matter where they are in the city. The idea also is to set up and develop a new web page that would provide additional information for those that are interested. So let me at this time turn it over to Damian. I appreciate the work that Damian and the team have done to prepare for this. We have the chief, we have Derek Reamer and others on the call with their questions. So with that, Damian, take us away.
Thank you, Assistant Manager Green. Mr. Chairman, Mayor, members of council, thank you for the chance to speak to you today. And thank you for the chance to wear a blazer at my home, something that doesn't get to happen very often. I've got a presentation to share with you. Get it going. Y'all see that? You see that okay, Jim? If you'll give me a thumbs up.
Yes,
All right.
I can see it.
All right,
Thank
great. All right, so as Mr. Green just articulated pretty much the entire presentation, I'll get my chance to say it too. So obviously, it was the summer that was. It was obviously easily one of the most difficult, intense summers on record for the city of Raleigh by anyone's standard, and very difficult, particularly if you lived in the downtown area. If you have a business there or you live there, there was a lot of activity and it had real consequences to your livelihood. And so lots of folks in that community reached out to the mayor and other members of council and said, is there any way that you could help us find out information faster and quicker? And so that's what we've been charged to do. So as Jim articulated, we quickly pulled together a cross-departmental team consisting of all the departments you can see there on the screen, with the goal of finding some way that we can reach out to this group in a special, unique way. The initial concept was an email notification, which would be consistent with some other notifications that we already had in place. But it was, that idea was not quite fitting for what the expectation was. And so now we've been referred to this committee to present a new recommendation. So before I get into that recommendation, let me just give you a sense of strategy that we took into consideration before we made the recommendation. And that is, as you can appreciate, during a crisis of any kind, it's an intense moment. Information is flying around, and it's important that we as a city organization provide clear, timely information. And when you use multiple different platforms, you run the risk of either putting out misinformation or the messaging changes and isn't quite correct or quite as consistent as it needs to be. So what we try to do is try to funnel everything to one location that is the number one source, the absolute best information source we can provide in a given time, and that is our website. So in a crisis, we try to use all of our platforms to drive to that one location because we know from our standpoint, that will be the one place where the latest and best information is available. So in moving forward, we have a recommendation that we use our Gov delivery system, which is something that we already have in-house, that is a subscription-based email platform that provides updates from parks to water, Raleigh Water. But this is something that people can subscribe to. And while this isn't going to be email-based, it is in fact, as the headline says on the PowerPoint slide, it's a text alert. So folks will receive a text alert from our Gov delivery system if they subscribe. And the focus will be to give them information about incidents that take place in the downtown area primarily, but it could be in other places as well. And incidents can range from an unplanned protest to a celebration. You know, NC State wins national championship this year in the women's team, and there's a big celebration in Hillsborough Street. That might be something that we would want to send out information about. If you've had any experience with the Wake County Public School System, you're somewhat familiar with what we're talking about. I have 2 kids there, and so almost daily I get a text from them that says, please visit our latest update. And it's a link to their website and to a certain page on their website. And that's what we're proposing, is that we would send out a message saying, check our latest update, and it would take you to a new web page we are creating that is the hub of all that information. And let me break that down a little bit further. So this new web page will have obviously safety information. It'll have a special events calendar. We'll have embedded the RPD Twitter feed, which is generally the best source of information in terms of getting timely information. And that'll be embedded in the page, as well as a place to sign up for future other notifications. In essence, it's a one-stop shop or one-stop location for our community to get information as fast as possible. And this is a sneak peek at what the page could look like. You get a sense of, you can see the Raleigh Police Twitter feed that will be live and streaming. It shows the special events calendar. And then it also lists safety tips that one could take in the event of a significant event downtown, or wherever for that matter. And then gives more chances to either connect to other city platforms such as our Twitter, Facebook, or Instagram accounts, or sign up for further notifications. Assuming this is in keeping with the vision that you had in mind, we would then move forward and work with the Downtown Raleigh Alliance and other alliances to help market the concept and solicit subscribers. Again, this is an open subscription, so anyone can sign up. You don't have to just live in a certain area or work in a certain area. You can sign up from anywhere. But once they sign up, then they will get these texts when they get pushed out. Also on our end, we will have to walk that line of figuring out when is the right time to send them out. What are those triggers that justify sending out a notification? So that's pretty obvious. But sometimes we have events that are more localized. It might be just around the state capitol, for example. And so should we send something out and get people really scared if we send something out about an event that's just going to be localized to the state capitol? Or is it more important to send it out just in an effort to be transparent? Those are some of the nuances that we're going to have to work out, and we will work out as we move this forward. But the good news is that if this is indeed in keeping with what you'd like, we have the Gov delivery system in place, and we can move forward rather quickly. Speaking of quick, that is the end of my presentation, and happy to address any questions.
Damien, could you take down the slide deck so we can all see each other?
Thank you, and I am back. My tech difficulties have been resolved. Sorry for that. My computer decided to push a mandatory update, and when I tried to join with my phone did not want to participate in the meeting. All right, does anyone have any questions?
Yes.
Go ahead, Mayor.
So, have you given any thought to maybe doing this as a pilot first in the downtown and then expanding this? Since, and then the second part of that is the questions that you're asking about, when should an alert go out, whatnot, that's something that should be discussed with the business community. Like, I would get feedback from them on what they want to hear from us, and go from there.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you for the question. So I think the answer is yes. Initially, this was an idea, was to be a pilot. So that's our intent. I would have to look to my friends in IT if you could limit it to in terms of subscribers to a downtown area. But again, the primary focus is going to, most of the activity is downtown for sure. But we'd be happy to reach out to them and hear more if this is something that is meeting with their needs.
Damien, I didn't know if you were inviting me in to then add to that, but this is the
Always welcome
stack
back.
there.
Yes.
So, Mayor, we could make it a private sign up where we solicit the names and numbers through the Downtown Raleigh Alliance and create the sign up page or the text list from that.
That would be my initial preference, simply because that's who asked for this. And I would like to see them provide the feedback and also know that we listened.
Absolutely.
And Corey wants to say something.
Yeah, so couple of things. The first one is, yes, we need to make sure that those that have businesses downtown are aware. But also, I was thinking if we can at least add the homeowner associations and groups who live downtown, so that those residents, at least they receive the information and they can disseminate it through their tool to the rest of the residents who live downtown. My other thing is, so right now, Go Raleigh, they send text messages out for street closures and detours, weekend tours. At least they did a lot last year. Haven't seen it in a while. I received those text messages. So I'm thinking, when we're talking about this system, how the two correlate, because they have one texting system and another texting system, and we're having to manage them both via the city, can be very cumbersome. So that may be something to really, as we move forward, to think about, and we'll look at the policies they have in place on when and how they send out messages, and then try to formulate we can't do it one size fits all, but some type of pattern of consistency. Because like I said, they would send messages last year whenever there was a weekend detour downtown. Basically just said, Go Raleigh weekend detour, customer service. They gave a phone number and they gave a link to
And what I would say to that, Counselor Knight, is because this is a subscriber-based program at this point, obviously those people would be the ones that would get the information. So this would be an example where it happens more often than not, where the Raleigh Police Department's Public Information Office and the city's communications office will work together to make sure that all of the necessary media outlets receive that type of information. This is not where you would, to me, it would not be prudent to just go solely on a subscriber basis. You want to make sure that you can immediately push that type of information out as expedient as you possibly can to the greater masses, and thus then having someone on site or available to offer a statement as is necessary, either from the police department or from the city. I think that would be the best approach, as we have seen in the last week, 2 mass shootings across the United States. This would be a way to release information, but this could not be the absolute way to get information out to the greater community.
Certainly, and I totally agree with that. I think, we all know that everybody gets their information in different ways, but I think this could be and should be one of the ways that we would get out information quickly to folks if such an incident were to occur.
I don't disagree with you. I think that's absolutely a possibility, but if your subscriber list is small and you have 500,000 people, I think you want to make sure that you are benefited in disseminating that information by other means. And the benefit to this is this, I would say, not to take away from the greater committee's voice, but this is another tool in the tool chest. But when information gets disseminated, usually by the city and the police department, and critical issues, it's going out in a Twitter feed, it's going out in Facebook, it's going out with all of those platforms, in addition to what is your traditional radio and television outlets as well. And Damien, I'm sure you can add to that. But yeah, this to me would be another tool.
I agree. Good.
Thank you.
I'm ready to make a motion.
Okay.
I would like to make a motion to direct staff to initiate a pilot program using a text alert system in our downtown, with the goal of expanding that program after a test period of, say, 3 months. And I want to thank you for looking at this and addressing the needs of our downtown.
A second by Councilmember Branch. All in favor? Okay, that is unanimous, and so that will be our recommendation to the full council. The next item we have on our agenda is the community-centered economic development / strategic small business investment, which would be the community stores and accessory commercial units issue that we continued from our last meeting.
Yes, Councilmember Melton, thank you. And as you indicated, this is a follow-up item from January. And at that meeting, we talked with the committee about corner stores, pros, cons, shared information on enforcement, shared information about our development code, and planning did a lot of the presentation talking about how the code encourages that retail throughout the city. We also had information on grants and other programs that we have for corner store. Council was interested in discussing this issue in more detail. Couple issues in particular. First off, today is going to be our police chief. I think it was Councilmember Branch who wanted more information on enforcement broken out by council districts. So the chief's going to share some of that information. Council was interested also in discussing more on retail throughout the city, particular in residential areas, and also best practices. One of the items that was mentioned last time was accessory commercial units, ACUs. And Brittany Waddell, our Assistant Planning Director, is going to be here to talk about the zoning issues and about ACUs, and also some best practices in mobile retail. What we heard from the committee was, how can we do a better job of getting healthy food out into the community? The last item to be discussed, I believe it was Councilmember Knight who asked about looking at our parks facilities and community centers. How could we encourage more farmers markets and other uses, again, to get healthy food out into the community? Ken Hissler, our Assistant Parks and Director, will be here to talk about that issue. So with that, I'll turn it over to Brittany and the police chief.
Thank you,
Sorry.
Jim.
Just one second. We're going to move to. There you are. So we wanted to start with Chief Deb Brown. If you'd like to speak a little bit about the original follow-up items from the January meeting. There were questions related to convenience stores by the district. So I think the chief wanted to start the presentation there.
Thank you, Brittany. Thank you, Jim. This really is a follow-up to Councilor Branch's, I believe it's Councilor Branch's question last time in regards to having just an overview of how many convenient stores are in your respective districts. And what I will say here is this is not actually a complete list. This is what the police department can offer based on the calls for service specific to convenience stores that do occur in our city. And as you can see, you've got a 2016 to 2020 view there. In looking at Department of Commerce's data, the challenge is trying to identify specifically what meets the criteria for the convenience store, because that's not the way that it is specifically identified. It's more on the lines of retail. And so this is probably not a comprehensive list, but this provides you with some idea of the types of incidents by convenience store type in our city that police are having to respond to. We are continuing to look to see what that, if that data does exist specific to that request, but we have not found it just yet. And we have also assessed where ABC licenses are issued as well. There again, you don't get the pure data that you're probably looking for. So we are still assessing that. And what we have done though, and I can provide that to you at a different time, is to provide you with where they are specifically located as it relates to your district also. So then you could have a map to see pretty much with dots on the map indicating where they are along what major or smaller streets and corridors they're located. So I'll take any questions there, but that just kind of gives you an overview over the last several years, just on convenience store types that we do code those calls accordingly based on premise type, and convenience store is a premise type in our reports.
Right. If I can, Jonathan.
Go ahead, Councilmember Branch.
First of all, Chief, thank you for this information. This data kind of underscores the reason why I have a pause when we have this conversation about convenience stores, because of the number of incidents that I've had alone just in my district. I think as we move forward, we need to really look at how we want to cultivate and what requirements we're really looking that we can enforce. So I'm going to be looking a lot to Brandon in the attorney's office on requirements we can make to try to make things safer, as far as, you know, what they sell and how much they can sell and things of that nature, percentage wise. But thank you, Chief, for this information and for the future information to come. For me, that can come in the manager's update. It doesn't have to come back before this committee but that's just, you know, me speaking. But thank you again.
If I could add one more thing, we got some last minute information. So I'll just share this and I can follow up with it in a memo or report, in the manager's report. But District A has 85 locations, District B, 157 locations, District C, 237 locations. And I think this kind of adds to your point, Councilor French. District D, 155 locations, and District E, 78. So we are continuing, and this I just received, but we are continuing to work with the various departments and entities that may be able to provide additional information as it relates to, there again, the actual type of premise as well.
Thank you, Chief, for that information, and it does underscore the point I've been trying to make. But I look forward to more as we move forward in the conversation.
Okay, are there any other questions about this part of the presentation? I can't see everyone because it's still up, but I don't want to have y'all keep pulling it down, put it back up if there's more.
And Councilman Melton, if you're okay, I'll continue with the presentation. There's more information that might help for before we take too many questions.
Yes, go right ahead.
Okay, thank you. So as Jim mentioned, Brittany Waddell with Planning and Development here today to discuss some further explore some strategies for promoting neighborhood retail as part of the larger food security conversation. And the hope today is to address some of the questions and requests that we received from the January meeting when we were discussing more specifically corner stores, but the conversation pivoted a bit to other models for neighborhood serving retail. So we'll begin by exploring options for current allowed zoning best practices, including mobile and temporary retail uses, discuss accessory commercial units per the committee's request, and explore some possible strategies for comprehensive planning and future land use map changes that could address food security concerns in specific areas of the city. And finally, we'll turn the presentation over to Parks, Recreation, and Cultural Resources to discuss potential uses within city parks. So we'll begin with existing zoning uses, which we would consider low-hanging fruit, where small adjustments could be made to add flexibility to the UDO. And there are existing uses that could be expanded or further encouraged in more locations throughout the city. As a reminder, Council recently approved TC 1420, allowing on-site sales and increased flexibility for community gardens. Other mobile and temporary options that could be used for nutritional support include food trucks, temporary or pop-up events, or outdoor mobile vending carts as pictured on the earlier slide, produce stands, and temporary mobile retail, which provides a self-contained mobile option. This committee had a review of mobile retail uses in August of 2019 and October of 2018, where discussions explored expanding the types of uses that would qualify as mobile retail, and also expanded the zoning districts in which that retail would be allowed. So currently, these uses are allowed in mixed-use districts. They are not allowed on vacant lots. Food trucks can't be left on site overnight and have restrictions related to the location and the placement in proximity to other uses. And temporary mobile retail has a maximum number of days in which they can operate per year in each location. These regulations may warrant further review through the lens of food security options. Increased flexibility could be explored by reevaluating the current restrictions and looking for ways to make creative changes that would promote these business models while mitigating possible negative impacts. So we're going to switch gears to talk a little bit about accessory commercial units. The committee expressed interest in getting more information on this, and we have some examples for you today. Accessory commercial units contain a commercial use co-located with a residential use. It's worth noting that they're generally facing a public street as opposed to a typical accessory unit like an ADU, which you would see on the side or in the rear yard of a property. And so, as shown in the slide, they are co-located and often attached to residential properties. And most examples we found are in areas where commercial and residential uses are allowed by right. We see many examples of ACUs on the West Coast. This ACU is in Portland. Portland has a commercial mixed-use zoning that allows commercial and residential by right. Also worth noting that they have no setbacks from the sidewalk to allow for direct frontage on the street. This particular example is a Mexican restaurant. The next example is in Memphis. Like Portland, they also have a mixed-use zoning where this is allowed. Once again, residential and commercial uses are allowed by right. And their particular zoning, CMU3, does have a 20-foot setback requirement. And in this instance, that space is being used for off-street parking. And this particular example, this is an appliance sales and repair shop. Another example, this ACU is in New Orleans. This is in an historic neighborhood mixed-use district. It allows residential by right and commercial uses up to a certain percentage by right, and then larger businesses require special approval. They do not have a setback for commercial uses in this district. So we have commercial use types in the UDO currently, but I wanted to clarify that these uses are not structures. By definition, they are subordinate in purpose and size and customarily associated with a principal use that's located on the same lot, which would be residential. Those uses include home occupations or live-work businesses, and they're designed to be contained within the primary structure, and home occupation specifically must be imperceptible from the exterior. So ACU examples, as shown in the earlier slides, are hindered by the UDO by a few factors: the allowed uses and building types in residentially zoned areas, our accessory use definition requiring that the use be incidental to and associated with the primary use, the required parking requirements for commercial uses. There are limitations set forth in the UDO for the allowed uses for residentially zoned districts. And our current regulations could render a conversion to retail in an ACU unfeasible. There are building and life safety upgrades that could be cost prohibitive. Specifically considering ACUs as a source of healthy food, there are considerations related to food prep and food storage that could be cost prohibitive for smaller spaces. We received a question, I believe from Councilmember Branch, related to, at the last meeting, related to health, the county health regulations. And restaurants and catering businesses are regulated by the county. Any food prep on site would require a commercial grade kitchen. Sales of packaged foods and fresh foods, including dairy and meat products, are regulated by the North Carolina Department of Agriculture and Consumer Services. So would this be the best use for the goal that we have in mind? And what are things that need to be considered? Would they be allowed in all residential districts? Would certain commercial uses be prohibited? And we should give consideration to like our home occupations and our live-work units, which currently aren't allowed in accessory structures, but generally these types of uses exist in commercial mixed-use districts, which generally promote that type of live-work and home occupation model. So that should be a consideration. Whether or not these will be allowed in that type of unit, and if that would defeat the purpose if the goal is to bring in healthy foods and to make it more about food security. Would parking be required? How would we regulate signage and lighting in respect to our adjacent properties? Would the location be limited to the front of the property for public accessibility? And would we also need to consider how we set regulations for hours of operation, for screening on the site, and for possible separation between similar uses? And finally, would we be able to allow smaller setbacks to bring these uses closer to the sidewalk? Ultimately, we see similar issues and concerns raised with corner stores, and from that conversation that we had specific to corner stores and convenience stores. Are they going to be a source of, as far as ACUs, are they going to be a source of healthy food? Are we comfortable with them being used for other commercial or retail purposes? Would they be created in areas where there's actually going to be a need for additional food options? Would they be concentrated in areas without a homeowners association? And much like corner stores, would there be an influx in lower income neighborhoods? And as kind of alluding to what the chief spoke to earlier, there are, these uses are not always seen as an asset to the community. So will they become a source of code or public safety concerns? So even if we zone for accessory commercial units, there are additional considerations. Commercial upfits, as I mentioned, could be cost prohibitive. There are special considerations for commercial spaces that aren't applied to accessory dwelling units, such as increased fire code or ADA compliance requirements. As with corner stores, the market will decide the viability of this business model in the city. And as local demand and supply chains will affect the cost and the profitability. It's important to note that zoning cannot limit the type of retail sales occurring in these ACUs. If retail sales are allowed, the city cannot require that only healthy foods be sold or that healthy food options be sold at all. The city also does not regulate alcohol sales, which is important to note. ABC permits are regulated and issued by the state. The city cannot control the issuance of those permits for establishments zoned for retail sales. So we wanted to switch gears a bit and present you with some higher level options to allow and plan for neighborhood retail. So I want to turn it over to Ken Bowers.
Hi, can everyone hear me okay? Good. So let's go to the next slide, Brittany. I wanted to cover first, we do have a provision for corner stores and retail, and in our mixed use districts, RX and OX allow retail in a mixed use building with limitations, and NX allows retail both standalone and in a mixed use building. I think the issue here is that in a lower density residential context, this is quite a big change in permitted density. You're going from maybe a district that primarily is oriented towards detached structures or townhouses and suddenly allowing 3 stories of apartments. And that's a really large jump in intensity, particularly if it's mapped through city initiation. Next. So one of the first things we could do is the comprehensive plan doesn't have a lot to say on this topic. There is one very cautiously worded policy in the land use element under retail that talks about putting retail close to the to where people live, but it's not very strong. So we could try to look at this from a comp plan perspective and work out what are the policy parameters for more small scale retail in neighborhoods. And the first step is to look at the actual text of the plan and the narrative policies. So that means no change to the map, but we might put some policies that say retail is acceptable if it meets these type of criteria. Like it's not these types of retail sales are fine and other things are not. We might talk about the size of them. We might talk about the location, only on a corner at the intersection of 2 streets that at least meet this minimum classification that would tend to push these uses to some of the more busier neighborhood streets as opposed to internal to a neighborhood. The next step that you could go to is you could actually revise the future land use map to identify specific locations where we might want to see corner stores or neighborhood retail. And that would mean probably mapping little pieces of neighborhood mixed use in neighborhoods. And I should note That does exist on the map today, but it generally exists where either the zoning or historic use of the property is of a neighborhood retail character. So, for example, where the Side Street Cafe is in Oakwood, or some other small-scale retail uses in neighborhoods, you will see that designation. You could also, if we feel like that designation is too expansive, create a new category. I would note that no new land use categories have been added to the comp plan since it was adopted in 2009. Now, either of these things would not change any existing regulations or permit any more uses on the ground, but they would provide policy support if someone who wanted to do a corner store or a neighborhood retail use wanted to come in through the rezoning process to get it. Right now, if they come into an area that's mapped primarily for residential, that's automatically inconsistent with the plan. If we had specific policy support, either in the narratives that said this level of retail is okay in a residential area, or that actually changes the map, then that would allow those rezoning petitions to be consistent. Next. The next step, of course, is to look at the code itself. Ideally, we would work out some of the policy implications before doing this. But for example, if we do change the comp plan, you don't necessarily need a new district. Someone petitioning it could take NX zoning and add sufficient conditions to it to condition down the intensity, so it would be consistent with the character of the area in which it was located. For example, I could apply NX in an area that's zoned for R6, and one of the conditions I could say is that any residential use of the property has to abide by R6 standards. So that would preserve R6 for residential, but it would allow a commercial option. So that's through the magic of conditional zoning. The other thing is we could look to take the existing residential districts or the NX and OX districts and modify them or amend them in some way. So we could, right now, retail is not permitted in R zones. We could change the code so that it is permitted in certain R zones, and we could define what the use limitations are. Same that we would do for policy. Maybe it's only at the corner of two streets of a certain classification. For lots of a certain size, we would define, do we want off-street parking or not? Things of that nature. The second option, and also ACUs would fall under this, would be basically amending the existing districts in the code. Option 2 would be if we feel like none of the existing tools in the code work for this purpose, we could create a new district and add it to the code. So one option would be a new mixed-use district that would amend Chapter 3. We would have to add it to all the use tables throughout the chapter. That would be a fairly significant and major text change because of the number of different parts of the code it would touch. The second option would be instead to put an overlay district that would add a commercial option to whatever the underlying zoning was. So it could be mapped over a residential zone, but it would allow that commercial option. Now, option 2 compared to option 1, if we were just to give a comparison, if we were to modify all the residential zones to allow commercial under certain circumstances, that meant that as soon as that text change was adopted, any lot that met those requirements would suddenly be permitted for retail. So it would apply citywide instantaneously. And in analyzing that, we'd have to think about every single lot that might meet the standards and is that an appropriate lot for some sort of corner store or retail use. Under option 2, whether we create a new district or an overlay district, until that district is mapped, there's no impacts. So it's a bit of an easier lift in that regard, because obviously the site-specific impacts can be considered at the time the map is amended, whether that is through petition or through city initiation. Now, as I said with option 2, staff's general thought is if at some point we want to go down this road, the overlay district is probably an easier amendment to the code and a more flexible amendment to the code, and would do more to preserve whatever the underlying residential zoning was. Next. This is just a map. This shows, for example, in an area that's entirely R4, here is a fairly sizable corner location that's zoned R4. It's located at two fairly significant streets, Leesville Road and Lynn Road in Northwest Raleigh. Lots of different options for how this might become retail. or not, depending on how it went through the process. You could map an NX district on it. Someone could petition for an NX district with conditions. If we were to write a corner retail provision into the R4 district, this is probably the type of location where you might want to see it apply. Or if you were to create that overlay district, this is the type of location where such a thing might be mapped. Next.
Well, Ken, I want to say that's my church. So, no.
Okay. Thank you.
Noted.
Your church is not interested in opening up a grocery store at the corner of Leesville and Lynn?
We have other ways to help and give back to the community.
Okay. All right. Next. So, our possible next steps here are, essentially to continue coordination and evaluating these issues, including food security. We can look at our options for enabling more neighborhood scale or mobile commercial and mixed use districts, create more flexibility for mobile retail and temporary use options. And I think when we get into Ken Hissler's presentation, we'll get into that a little bit more. We can explore whether ACUs are something that we might want to accommodate in our code. And we can, of course, explore comprehensive plan amendments that would help define some of the policy guidance that would guide any future changes to the code, or would guide the evaluation of rezonings that might introduce these uses into neighborhoods. So we're going to take a pause here, and myself and Brittany are available to answer any questions you have as it relates to policy and code changes.
Can we go ahead and pull this down so I can see folks? Okay, do we have questions or comments? Councilmember Branch.
Well, more aligned comments. First of all, thank you for that part. And I know we have more presentation to go. But as far as I understand the overlay part would be the easiest. On the staff standpoint, I'm still having overlay flashbacks over the last couple of years. But I do favor a rezoning requirement instead of us doing it by right in that first option. So I like 2A, even though I know it's a lot of work. But I really feel that's how we get the real community input. And it helps, I think, also from a council and enforcement measure as we look at our city and growth and figuring out what's the best fit or best value for a particular community as it goes forward. So that will be my 3 cents on that.
If I could just clarify, I believe 2A was actually to create a new district. I think that if we want to see this petition through rezoning, the first step really is to look at the comp plan amendments that would set the stage for such rezonings.
Okay.
So staff would recommend that we kind of take that as a first step, because right now, if you're in a residential area, that's automatically going to be inconsistent with the plan, because there simply isn't policy support for rezoning away from residential areas on the future land use map to allow this type of use. So unless it's designated on the future land use map, that's automatically inconsistent. Doesn't stop you from improving it, but I think it provides a lot more guidance to potential applicants and more assurance to the neighborhoods as to, if we work out the policies, as to when would you contemplate this being a good idea? Because you're not going to want it everywhere. You're only going to want it in certain locations.
Okay, thank you.
Mayor.
So I want to go back to the mobile and temporary retail. I think that's something we need to look at immediately. I think what we heard last meeting is that these food truck spots are very rarely used. And if they're rarely used, that means something is wrong. So I would recommend, first off, everybody's okay with this, making a motion to do just that, relooking at our mobile and temporary retail spots.
Is that a motion, Mayor?
Yes.
Okay, it was seconded by Councilmember Knight. All in favor? Okay.
Okay, the second item, I kind of landed where Corey is. Option 2, I think we need clarity, and creating some type of mixed-use district with guidelines and rules makes more sense to me, although it is much more work. But as you also indicated, Ken, there would have to be some baby steps along the way. So the first thing would be looking at the comp plan. I think that's how you can bring people around. So I would, that's where I'm heading with this.
Councilmember Knight.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. In general, I want to make it easier, and I'm interested in this neighborhood retail idea. So I appreciate y'all bringing this forward, and so I'm not sort of coming down on one side or the other about how we do it, but I do think we need to move forward and figure that out. A couple questions for Mr. Bauer. Did you say I think you were talking about a comprehensive plan when you said there have not been any changes to it since 2009? Was that just in this section of the plan?
What I said was that we haven't added any new land use categories to the future land use map since it was adopted. Now, the categories we have changed. They changed because when the UDO did away with density limits for mixed use areas, we had to accommodate that. We have made other modifications, and we have more modifications that were as a result of the equitable development around transit study. So the policy language around each category has evolved in some cases quite substantially since the plan was adopted. But what we haven't done is created a brand new policy and added a new color to the map that's not on there today.
Okay.
What the colors mean has changed. The colors themselves have not changed.
And then
this
okay.
Doesn't mean we can't, just give us an history.
Okay, great. That's hard to believe, but that's pretty wild. Okay, thank you. And then in terms of the zoning tools, you talked about it would once you created one of these districts, it would be city-wide or available to the whole city. Would the NCODs of a neighborhood at an NCOD, would that not limit this in such a neighborhood, or is that category not within the NCOD to limit this?
So the NCODs do not regulate use. They regulate the subdivision of land and dimension characteristics of buildings, such as setback and height. So if you change the use now, if I mandate a certain setback and my commercial use wants to be up at the sidewalk, then the NCOD can prevent that. But the NCODs don't. We have NCODs that are mapped over OX zoning and other mixed-use zoning, and OX uses are permitted. They just have to abide by the dimensional standards of the NCOD.
Okay. All right. Great. Thanks for that explanation. Appreciate it.
So I have a couple things. One of them, ironically, was going to suggest that we break this up into pieces because I think the way we handle it may be a bit different for the different types. And so I'm glad we went ahead and gave direction to move or to recommend out that we're going to move forward quickly with the mobile retail and the food truck stuff. I even think there's a bit of a distinction between the accessory commercial units and then the corner stores as their own standalone structure. As far as accessory commercial unit goes, I see that sort of as almost like a middle part, like a bridge. And I would not be in favor of the overlay district. I wasn't on council when all that happened with the accessory dwelling units, but I still also have like this negative feedback from it. And if we look at what happened with the accessory dwelling units, the overlay districts resulted in no accessory dwelling units being produced. And so if the idea is to make it happen, I don't think we should try the same approach and expect different results for accessory commercial units. For the accessory commercial unit, I want to make it as easy as possible. And I think creating a rezoning petition or a new district is not going to make it easy. And so my preference for accessory commercial units would be to allow them by right in certain residential zoning districts. Now, as far as the corner stores, the standalone, more substantial bodega type things where we've seen some concerns also with the public safety issues, I'm willing to take a more slow burn, cautious, let's get everybody's buy-in in the weeds approach on that. And I could see that being with one of your two options. But for ACUs, I'd like to move those by right in certain residential zoning districts. Looking at the what prevents, hinders ACUs today, one thing that jumped out to me was the parking requirements. I don't think we should have parking requirements for ACUs. I mean, the point is for it to be small scale neighborhood retail. Like, we want people biking here or walking here. I mean, this is going to serve a very captive community. Now, maybe a really popular commercial unit, and folks may be coming from other parts of the city because they really like it. But I think the point is not to make it difficult, not to require lots of parking, but to make it something that's accessible to the community around it. And so that's my feeling on the ACU issue. So I guess I agree with the mayor and Councilmember Branch on anything beyond ACUs. Looking at the options, looking at the districts and the zonings. But ACUs, I would like, my preference would be to recommend to move forward with those in residential zoning districts by right. So that's where I'm at. And I see Councilmember Knight shaking his head, and I don't want to split vote on this. So I don't know what we need to do with this one issue. Mayor or Corey, do you have anything else to add with what I said?
Let's have more conversation. Because I'm not there. I'm not where you are yet.
I need more information before I can get there. I see this potentially being highly contentious, and I want to make sure that we give a lot of thought to it so we can answer questions and respond. I really liked what was in the presentation, like showing examples so people can visualize what you're talking about. But this is going to take some education. So I'm with Corey. Let's continue to have some conversation and see how we can move in that direction.
Right. And the reason why I want more conversations, because we can't regulate use. And some of the uses by right concern me.
So, but to that point, and just having a conversation here, I mean, if we were to recommend exploring ACUs by right in certain residential zoning districts, that's going to be a text change, which means this would have to go to staff for them to draft it, then to public comment, then to planning commission for public comment, then back to council for public comment and vote. So could some of this information, examples, discussions, if we made that recommendation today to explore it, would those issues not be worked out through the process before it came back to council table?
I'm not where you are.
Yeah.
Councilor Milton. And I guess this is my gut talking right now. I think we need to do more work.
And I saw a staff hand up, but oh, here we go. Go ahead. I lost it.
Hi, sorry, don't want to jump in, but one thing I will note, and that's kind of why we left that on our action slide as an option. There are other strategic planning committees that are looking at food security issues, and they may find other things that need to come out of that. So if you are looking for more information, giving the other committees opportunities to see where they can identify these similar needs, it could all cultivate into a larger, if you're going to move the route of a text change, it might have to take into account some of their considerations. So that's kind of staff's current recommendation, is that we allow us to confer with the other committees and look at this more comprehensively.
So would we report it out and then bring it back if we had to then? So on the mobile retail, the food truck, stuff like that, we're making a recommendation to go ahead and move those issues forward. So now we're looking at ACUs and other corner store type facilities. Are we holding that in committee, or are we reporting it out with direction to staff to continue working on exploring options, I guess is what I'm trying to figure out.
I would say we hold it, but we provided staff with direction to start exploring some options. So then they can bring that back to us and we can further see what they've come up with.
All right, is everyone good with that? We go ahead and report out the mobile retail food truck type stuff now, and we'll hold these other two for some more work.
Is staff good with that? With the direction? Okay.
We are clear with that. Just one clarification though, for the mobile retail, the clarification, the motion we heard was to specifically look at the mobile retail locations. Is that correct?
Look at the mobile retail rules.
Yeah, we can amend if we need to, but I thought the intent was to look at the entire program.
Yep.
Thank you. That's why I was clarifying. So yes, that item would need to be reported out and approved by the full council. And it sounds like you would like staff to continue to look at these other items. And that's up to the committee. You could report that out as well and take the item out of committee. We would look at it as part of our strategic planning teams, as Brittany mentioned, and can bring things back at a different time. Or you could leave that retail corner store in committee. That's up to the committee.
My preference is going to be to leave it in committee so attention remains on this issue and so we can actively continue the work. Is everybody good with that? All right, so that's what we're doing. Mr. Green, do you have what you need?
Yes, sir, I do. And we have one more item on the micro farmers markets in our parks and community centers.
Motion to
Okay,
approve.
Do we want
Makes my life easy.
Let's go ahead and get the presentation, but I think you can sense where we may be on this one, so brevity may be good.
I'm gonna need a little help. So, well, that's an interesting start, Mayor. I was sitting here preparing, and now you just completely threw me, and I got to get my feet back underneath me. So, connecting community. So, I want to thank Jim for inviting Oscar and I to this conversation a little bit ago, and I was trying to connect where it was going: accessory commercial units and mobile farmers markets. So I was glad that over the last probably 6 weeks, Brittany and Ken and others have helped me to kind of see where this goes. So Parks and Recreation, connecting community, and we think through these smaller farmers markets, there is a certain opportunity there. So if you go back to the original plan by the Christmas plan, the squares were gathering spaces. How did we bring together the fabric of Raleigh? How did we share common bonds? And at the same point, it breaks down barriers. Parks are gathering spaces by nature, and they should reflect the fabric of what we're trying to do. So my intention today is to share with you a little bit of how Parks and Recreation, not just in Raleigh, but across the country, is doing this through mini farmers markets, or in some cases, very large farmers markets. Talk about some of the opportunities that present, some of the inquiries or questions we need to resolve. And then being on the fact that you already told me to go figure it out, I still do want to get some direction from y'all at the end. So if you want to advance me to the next slide, Brittany. So we're already working on some of this. So the use of city parks for recurring pop-ups, fresh food options is something that's already happening. And I'm going to connect a lot of this just together in a conversation. Is going to a farmer market is a recreational, fun, leisure activity. Most families will do that. Individuals will do that as part of their weekend. They'll do that as a part for their leisure experiences. We've already been working on some of this as we provide healthy food options for many of our participants through our summer camp programs. We've been doing it through our remote learning programs. We're currently working with Interfaith on the potential for a food pantry at our teen center. And through the strategic plan, we're looking at community gardens with a 1-year goal that we just presented to the core team the other day. So as Brittany alluded to, there's other aspects of the strategic plan that this healthy food service connects to, and it's both in growth and natural resources, and it's in safe, vibrant, and healthy communities. I'm just going to quickly, for safe, vibrant, and healthy, what we've done is we've requested over the next year is to figure out the where and the how. Where are we going to do it on public space? And then how do we do that to make sure we can be consistent? It's gaining momentum. We have groups coming to us. And so we can be the same in different areas of town. We want to be able to make sure we have a consistent practice, and we're doing that. So that's a goal that has been presented within the Safe, Vibrant, Healthy Committee, and we have a team working on that now. It also incorporates the Parks and Recreation mission, vision, and values. If we think about our goals to bring people to parks and parks to people, well, then what better way to do it than through healthy food options? And then I keep our mission statement right below my desk every day, and it goes back to our initial slide, is how do we connect and enrich our communities? So it seems like a very natural fit. We talked a little bit about the roles of parks in the community. Well, they're already health and wellness focused options. We do this social, mental, physical health and wellness, and these are ways that we're able to do that. I've mentioned what we've done through our summer food service, but then working with Chief and so from other stakeholders in the community, during COVID, we've been sites for food distribution to make sure we're taking care of those that have been most impacted by the COVID impacts and the impacts of those. The other part of it is we want to generate interest. So if we can be successful on public space, we may find that there's people in the private sector that may be wanting to do this as well. I'll kind of jump into the next slide if Brittany wants to move me over there, because as we're fortunate with our presence across the city, we know we're not everywhere. So we may find those private businesses that say, hey, I can do that in a parking lot that may be underutilized, that already is a retail location. Now, I promise I'm not going to talk about zoning because I know nothing about zoning. Well, I know enough to be dangerous, which is why Brittany and Ken did that part. But what you saw were examples of where we don't have to rezone park properties in order to do temporary retail or these mobile type of opportunities. We're fortunate that we do have the staffed facilities that we talked about. So I've got power, I've got water, I've got parking space, I've got staff, I've got restrooms that we already have in place that we can help support these opportunities. We've talked about locations, specifically locations as we work through the data that we have that are located in food deserts or where there are limited healthy food options. That's something we've been strategically looking at, and really for all of you is why we jumped in with both feet on that summer food service program, is we knew those students coming into our summer camps weren't going to have that confirmation of that healthy meal on a daily basis. So as we were able to use those strategic applications, we could then offer that service. But from just a logic, it extends the reach of our programs and services. We bring families together, we engage communities, we promote quality of life, we build community resilience, right? There's also an economic benefit that goes with this as well. So as we bring more folks into our facilities, our parks, we can share more about what we do while we're also supporting their needs. So we see the positivity that comes out of this, and it works for both organizations. The other one is it creates new opportunities, right? As we try to look at urban agriculture or bringing nature into an urban area, we can now have programs that are focused on those topics that may be very non-traditional for a lot of parks and recreation settings. What we found is that about 1 in 4 departments across the country are engaged in providing this level of activity. And there's no reason we can't build on it here, as we've tried before. And then the last one, community building, economic and health benefit, and then resilience building. Resilience building is making sure that you have the things in that community that helps them take care of themselves. And that has been something we've worked with our programs and services for the years. So we believe this is another way we can do that. But there are some things we have to work through. So most of what we're finding, and as we've worked through this topic ourselves, is the who and the how. Most parks and recreation departments are working with a third party, a nonprofit that they would partner with who has those connections to the local agricultural vendors. So in those instances, if we're doing this now on public property, we've got to work through a question of risk and liability. Is that the city assuming that? Or are we working with the third party to provide or to require that? And I can say just through my own research is a lot of the organizations will work through a nonprofit and they are requiring a certificate of insurance. Not all of them though. So as we work with, and I'll kind of leads to the next slide, as we work internally, we can do that. As we establish who we're going to work with, it's the delegation of responsibilities. As I call that, it's a simple you do, we do. It's not super high tech, but it's just making sure we understand the expectations and the requirements of both parties so that we can be successful. The last piece of that would really be, actually, let me back up on that a little bit. We want to go through some of these questions up. Do you take WIC? Do you take SNAP? Do you have these different ways to make sure, especially in at-risk communities, you're not pricing yourself out of that? We have to think about things like cost recovery. That's one of the things. Or are we looking at grants or sponsors? There are some costs and responsibilities that go through the delivery of these services. And as we navigate this, we'll answer those questions. We talk about facility locations. We're very fortunate with Parks and Recreation of where we have locations, but they're not always in the right location. While we try very hard to be walkable, a 10-minute walk with a box of groceries isn't very easy. Or even a bus ride with a couple young kids and that produce isn't always the easiest thing. So as we talked about potentially moving in with our private sector partners, we may not be as accessible. And so we do need to take that into consideration, where it may be easy for us to just say, yes, we're on the bus route. We have to think about the nature of those products that they're purchasing to make sure that we can serve the needs of the community. And then, like anything, it's sustainability, right? We want to make sure, if we're getting into this, that it's something we can do for the long term. And just simply, we don't want to be a one-hit wonder. If we're bringing it in, do we have the resources organizationally? I can't simplify it. It's an and, right? Because do we have a market manager? And if the city takes on more of the responsibility for the quote-unquote delivery of the event, and rather than working with a third party, do we have the staff to do that? And then, as I explained to Jim, one of the first questions everybody asks is, who's providing the tents, tables, chairs, trash cans, and extra trash bags? And as we hopefully start to respond from COVID, we know that there's going to be more opportunities happening from gatherings. And I was trying to keep track of the governor. He was talking while we were having this meeting and talking about some other restrictions. And so we're all excited to get back out and to enjoy our park spaces, but we just have to be conscious of what the impact could be on existing operations. So how do we get there? I'm going to summarize this kind of across 2 slides. We need to convene and do that internal assessment of risk and liability, and that's a conversation that our department needs to have starting with our attorneys in the risk management office, and then we would work with our other internal partners. We want to use data-driven evaluation to identify potential locations. That's just a simple way of saying we know the county has data, we know we have our city GIS data. Strategically, what is the right spot to consider when we first get into this? We want to make sure we're serving those that are most in need. We need to develop the instrument. It's that you do, we do, that talks about who's doing what, and then who can we partner with to bridge the local agriculture community. I don't know them, and who do we work with them? We have great relationships with Interfaith. We have great relationships already with Wake County Public School System Food and Nutrition Services. We've worked with Fertile Ground. We've worked with the Alliance Ministry, so with the Produce Box. We know they're out there. And if we can work through these first 3 bullets, we get to that end, and who can bridge us to that community? Because, you know, we can get there, but they know it better. And those are the stakeholders that we want to work with, and we can adequately reflect their needs as we get into the business. So before you just say, go do this, Mayor, here's my slide for recommended action items. I'm pretty sure I have your support. And with that, what we're looking for is that conversation with the city attorney and risk management. The liability question is one that I will say I don't lose sleep over much, but it is one that I want to make sure we get answers to, related to, there's a lot of vehicle and there's food being sold. And then we would also want to make sure we're working through Department of Agriculture in terms of the quality of the food. Are they registered through the different professional organizations? And with that, what are we going to sell? So much like they talked about with the ACUs, we don't want this to turn into a craft fair every weekend, but really being specific about the products that we're going to offer. And as I look to my peers in Holly Springs and in Huntersville, they're very prescriptive on what it has to be. And they're even prescriptive in some cases to how far from the local town you can be as a farmer. So I've seen 50 miles. I've seen you just have to be within the state of North Carolina. But we need to work through those questions. As I talked about, where I think is super important. Develop the agreement tool and identify the partners. We're confident if we can work through these, we can identify and target a pilot program for the fall. When I say pilot program, I mean 1 spot. I'm not talking about a program where we would be looking at multiple locations. But if we can work through these 4 bullets, we're confident that we could be targeting our first experience in the fall. And with that, I will move to questions.
I saw Councilmember Branch and then the mayor.
First of all, thank you, Ken, for the presentation. And I do like the idea of a pilot, and I'm going to offer up one of my favorite locations for our pilot, because when we built the building, one of the major requests that the citizens had was we want a space for fresh food or a place to gather, something is not vending machine oriented. And that was built into the design of the new Chavis Center, which should be opening this summer. So hopefully you all could look at that and the possibilities there. And it's centralized, it's on multiple bus lines, and it's walkable. So I definitely thank you for that. And I think this is something that we need to consider in the future build out of centers, because we do know there's been a big request at Barwell and talking about a community garden and doing things. So residents are looking for gathering places. So as we build our centers, we have to reimagine them, not just from an athletic standpoint, but also from a meeting and gathering place, and possibly ways to help support some of our small businesses as well.
Yeah,
So,
Councilor Branch, you make a great point. And, we've been engaged with Dr. Lane over at Barwell Road. And as I've shared, the benefit is yours is built into the master plan. I'm like, you're ahead of the game. You've got a group of community stakeholders that are ready to roll. And so it's like, just let us figure out the how. Like, so understanding what your group is committing to as part of that experience. And you're right. And it's interesting. I spent a bit of time in Indiana several years ago while my wife was getting her graduate degree. And they did that exact thing. They came in and retrofitted their hard space to be able to accommodate these markets on a recurring basis. So you're not dealing with that temporary setup all the time, but you've got the infrastructure in place. And it becomes a space of community gathering, breaking down barriers, and actually can cross over cultural lines, because you get to experience different flavors and different foods in a really fun, aesthetically pleasing setting. So thank you.
Mayor, did you?
Yes, so my question was going to be, could you do 2 pilots? So I just think this is such a great way to reach communities that are food deserts. And, and parks have also become our refuge. It's also where we've been feeding children since the start of COVID. So I absolutely love this idea beyond words. And I believe Councilor Knight has a question, and I'm going to say jump in, and then I'm going to I'm going to repeat my motion.
Since the chairman's in charge, I'll wait to be.
I think the mayor yielded her time. But go ahead.
Is that what she did? I'm not sure how that works in this. Okay, I'll take your time, Mayor. I love these ideas too, and I hope we can move forward on this very quickly. So I appreciate the work in this and thinking creatively about this, and also not overthinking it to where it becomes too burdensome or onerous for partners to work in this arena. One question I did have was, is the question of food trucks setting up in our city parks a separate question, or is that also implicit in this general idea?
That's a great question, Councilor Knight. So what we already have internal to our operations, we have a kind of an approved vendor process. So within the municipal code, you have to be approved to solicit by the director has that authority to determine whether the ice cream truck can come through Millbrook Park and sell ice cream. So what we established before my time was basically an approved vendor list. It's really not that high tech. If you are a food truck who is interested in doing business with the City of Raleigh Parks, Recreation, and Cultural Resources Department, we basically submit it. It's an application. Make sure you have all of your documentation in place through the county, through safety requirements, and you're getting your inspections. And then basically you're approved to show up in a park to be able to do that. And we will use that for our own purposes. So we will bring in food trucks for a lot of our own activities. One of the ones we're excited about this summer is that's how we're going to provide concessions out at Walnut Creek, is via food trucks versus trying to run our own concession operation. So that's the long answer. The short answer is no. The food trucks in parks and recreation space has already been identified. It doesn't get caught up in the work that Ken and his team's been assigned.
Okay, thank you for that. And I hope that as we go forward with this idea of making it easier for food trucks, if at all, it's not right now to do this and join in on this partnership and idea. And now I will yield the mayor's time back to the mayor. Thank you.
I understand we've got a motion. Go ahead.
Thank you, everyone. I want to thank staff for the presentations today. And I'm just repeating my motion to approve the action items set forth by Ken with the goal of creating a pilot program in the fall. I'll just add if we could look at potentially 2 districts and maybe do 2 pilots. That would be awesome. But if one is it, I get it. So that's my motion.
Seconded by Councilmember Knight. All in favor? Okay, that was unanimous. Mr. Green, do you guys have what you need from us?
Yes, sir, we do. Good work by the committee today. We've got the 3 motions down, and we'll work with you, Councilmember Melton, to report those motions out at the next council meeting. And that will also take out the 1 item on the notification text alert system. The other item will stay with staff doing more research on the ACUs and working with the strategic plan teams.
Okay, thank you very much. Looks we have one hand. Ken?
Yeah, I just want to make sure, Mayor, are you as explicit in your desire for that second location as Councilor Branch was, or do I have a little flexibility?
You have flexibility,
Thank you.
but I've kind of given you a big hint.
Okay. We will do our best. We will do our best.
Thank you,
All right.
Ken. But yes, you have flexibility.
I appreciate that. Thank you. I'm
All
good.
right.
Thank you, Councilor Melton.
All right, well, I think that wraps up our items for today. And so we will see y'all at the next meeting. Meeting adjourned.
Good meeting, everyone.